All right. Hey, it's Mr. Shrum, and I'm back to pick up where we left off in this article. This chart, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, estimates a quarter of mammals and more than 2/5 of amphibians are threatened with extinction. So here we are, the mammals. Now, the mammals and amphibians, they have asterisks. And that means this is measured from critically endangered includes extinct in the wild. So critically endangered includes extinct in the wild. So we have mammals and amphibians. The red is critically endangered, endangered, vulnerable, and then the little line there estimates threatened. So quarter of mammals, 2/5 of amphibians facing extinction. The study paints a picture of a suffocating human-caused sameness spreading across the planet as a small range of cash crops and high-value livestock are replacing forests and other nature-rich ecosystems, as well as eroding the soil, which causes a loss of fertility. These monocultures are more vulnerable to disease, drought, and other impacts of climate breakdown. Now, if you remember our talks about biodiversity and the importance of having a diverse plant and animal life in a region, the more species and types of things living in an area, if one of them do eventually die out and go extinct, you have many others to pick up the baton and keep the ecosystem going and chugging along. However, if these monocultures, where a whole region is devoted to one crop, that crop, if something does happen to the crop, that devastates the whole region and has a much bigger impact because there's not a lot of diversity. A culture of plants, if there's a drought there, and that has become the one food source for several species of animals, if you take away their food source, what do you think happens to them? They die out as well. And you see how this reverberates. It's like a chain of bad reaction, and it's devastating a lot of places. In terms of habitats, the deepest loss is of wetlands, which have drained by 83% since 1700, with a knock-on impact on water quality and bird life. Forests are diminishing, particularly in the tropics. In the first 13 years of this century, so from 2000 to 2013, the area of intact forest fell by 7%, bigger than France and the UK combined. Although the overall rate of deforestation has slowed, that's basically untrue because monoculture plantations are replacing biodiverse jungle and woodland. So they are being replaced with another type of plant. So necessarily they don't call it deforestation. However, you're replacing a forest with these monoculture plantations that are not biodiverse. It's just not helpful to the surrounding ecosystems. Oceans are no longer a sanctuary. Only 3% of marine areas are free from human pressure. Industrial fishing takes place in more than half the world's oceans, leaving 1/3 of fish populations overexploited. And what do you think happens to populations that are overexploited? Huh? It doesn't take a scientist to really think this through, okay? This is a picture of a scalloped hammerhead shark listed as endangered, dead on a drumline off Magnetic Island, Australia. Climate change, pollution, and invasive species have had a relatively low impact, but these factors are accelerating. It's getting worse, people. Emissions continue to rise. Last week, at the time of this article, which was back in 2019, 2 years ago, The amount of carbon dioxide, CO2, in the atmosphere passed 415 parts per million mark for the first time. Even if global heating can be kept within the Paris Agreement target of 1.5 degrees Celsius to 2 degrees Celsius, the ranges of most species will shrink profoundly, this paper warns. Population growth is noted as a factor as well, along with inequality. Individuals in developed countries in the developed world have 4 times as much of an economic footprint as those in the poorest countries, and the gap is growing. People in developed worlds, in developed countries, import resources from these other countries. There's transportation happening. The local ecosystems cannot sustain the levels of human population in these cities, right? New York, it's overpopulated, dense, so dense. The local ecosystem cannot sustain that many people, so they have to import. They have to transport resources from other places to sustain the way we are living. That is not sustainable, though. As the population of humans grow, more and more resources are being used. When you hear overpopulation, you have a picture of this person in the third world. They're all, maybe old, or they could be young children, starving children, right? They do not have a big ecological or economic footprint, okay? It's the developed countries, these, someone say, whatever, highly civilized. And highly civilized, that's not necessarily a positive thing in this case. There are a lot of sustainable cultures, indigenous cultures, that live in a way that they give back to the ecological system, right? They are living in a sustainable way. And they also live in a smaller way. Okay. This is an infographic. The world is losing its tree cover. Indonesia has lost 24.4 hectares of tree cover from 2001 to 2017. It's about a 15% decrease since 2000, and 2.44 gigatons of CO2. Giga, that is 10. Giga is 10 to the 9th, and ton is 1,000. So that would be 10 with 12 zeros behind it of CO2 emissions. That's a hefty increase for sure. Our species now extracts 60 billion tons of resources each year, almost double the amount in 1980. So that's a 200% increase in the amount of resources extracted each year, though the world population has grown by only 66% in that time. A 200% increase in resource extraction compared with 66% population growth in humans. So what does that mean? That's a big disconnect. The report notes how the discharges are overwhelming the Earth's capacity to absorb them. More than 80% of wastewater is pumped into streams, lakes, and oceans without treatment, along with 300 million to 400 million tons of heavy metals, toxic slurry, and other industrial discharges. Plastic waste has risen tenfold since 1980, affecting 86% of marine turtles, 44% of seabirds, and 43% of marine mammals. Fertilizer runoff has created 400 dead zones, affecting an area the size of the UK. Andy Purvis, a professor at the Natural History Museum in London and one of the main authors of the report, said he was encouraged. Nations had agreed on the need for bitter medicine. So they recognized that they needed to swallow this bitter pill. Okay. This is a picture of an olive ridley turtle snarled up in plastic waste. near an island in Panama, the Contadora Island in Panama. This happens all the time, people. This is the most thorough, most detailed, and most extensive planetary health check. The take-home message is that we should have gone to the doctor sooner. We are in a bad way. The society we would like our children and grandchildren to live in is in jeopardy, real jeopardy. I cannot overstate it. He said, if we leave it to later generations to clear up the mess, I don't think they will forgive us. Who's to say they even can? The next 18 months will be crucial. For the first time, the issue of biodiversity loss is on the G8 agenda. And if you need to know what the G8 is, that is the group of 8. Sometimes it's the group of 7. And these are nations, an intergovernmental political forum consisting of France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Russia. They have an on-again, off-again relationship with Russia. And they will eventually have to talk to China. We'll have to eventually incorporate China. But basically, that's just a group of government, a forum for governments to meet and talk about the global impact of the economy. And the UK has commissioned Partha Dasgupta, a professor at Cambridge University, to write a study on the economic case for nature, which is expected to serve a similar function as the Stern Review on the economics of climate change. Next year, China will host a landmark UN conference to draw up new global goals for biodiversity. This is a meat and dairy production uses 83% of farmland and accounts for 58% of agricultural greenhouse gas emissions, but only 18% of food calories. So that's interesting. Meat and dairy account for so much use of farmland, so much use of greenhouse gas emissions, pollution, and yet it doesn't provide that many calories. It's interesting. I didn't know that. Christiana Pasha Palmer, the head of the UN's chief biodiversity organization, said she was both concerned and hopeful. The report today paints quite a worrying picture. The danger is that we put the planet in a position where it is hard to recover, she said. But there are a lot of positive things happening. Until now, we haven't had the political will to act, but public pressure is high. People are worried and want action. So the more people know about the current state of affairs when it comes to biodiversity, the environment, they want action, because if we lose our life support system, we won't be able to live. It's that simple. The report acknowledges current conservation strategies such as the creation of protected areas. They're well intended but inadequate. Future forecasts indicate negative trends will continue in all scenarios except those that embrace radical change across society, politics, economics, and technology. Radical change, not piecemeal reforms. That's not going to cut it. It's personal change isn't going to cut it. You need social change, large-scale social change. And the way that happens, we'll have to find out. Here's a rhino walking through a wildfire in a field at Pobitora Wildlife Sanctuary in Assam State, India. The paper, it says values and goals need to change across governments so local, national, and international policymakers are aligned to tackle the underlying causes of planetary deterioration. This includes a shift in incentives, investments in green infrastructure, accounting for nature deterioration, and international trade, addressing population growth and unequal levels of consumption, greater cooperation across sectors, new environmental laws, and stronger enforcement. Now, I think that's important because do you really think the culture, the civilization will voluntarily switch to a sustainable way of living? No, you're going to need some pushback. You're going to need a way to influence big companies, big agriculture, big business. Otherwise, they will not switch over to a sustainable way of life. Greater support for indigenous communities and other forest dwellers and smallholders is also essential. Many of the last holdouts for nature are in areas managed by such groups, but even here, the pressures are beginning to take a toll as wildlife declines along with knowledge of how to manage it. More than 3.6 million hectares of pristine tropical forest was lost in 2018. This is from the University of Maryland Global Forest Watch. Yosef Satel, he is a co-chair, an IPVES, co-chair and entomologist, he studies bugs, at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research in Germany, said, "The situation is tricky and difficult, but I would never give up. The report shows there is a way out. I believe we can still bend the curve. People shouldn't panic. Well, I think they should panic, but they should begin drastic change. Panic not in an anxious way, but in a, oh my gosh, I got to do something now. We have to do something. Oh my gosh. And business as usual with small adjustments won't be enough. So itty bitty reforms here and there, not going to cut it. And that's it. That's the end of the article. So I hope that gave you a better understanding of the current state of affairs. Earth's natural life is in danger, folks. We are in danger. And I don't know if enough people know that. Uh, I know I can live my life and rarely think about these things sometimes, but we shouldn't do that. It is something we must face. All right, that's it for me. See you all next time. And if you ever want to talk about this, be sure to message me on Canvas, email me, and we can chat for sure. All right, see you guys.